Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order on today, Tuesday, February 21st. You know, it just so happened, last week I was attending the annual Banff National Park planning roundtable, and by annual I mean except for the interruption of COVID. I think the last one they had was 2019. But it was very good. Now, during that time, I wrote down this note, and it's funny that somebody changed during the NBA the lyrics of the Canadian anthem on a similar note. But the note that is obvious is that some of us are on this land, but Indigenous peoples are of this land. And I think that's an important distinction. It really helps us understand the different levels. And so with that, I would like to acknowledge that today, that the town of Canmore is located within the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge the Canmore area known as Shooting at Willows and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Arhe Nakota, comprised of the Bearspaw First Nation, Chiniki, and Goodstoney First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai. And we acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. And we acknowledge all nations who live, work, play, and help us steward this land. Turning to the agenda, are there any changes proposed? No? I will then move approval of the agenda for the February 21st, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And we'll move to our delegation for the Bow Valley Waste Management Commission. Welcome to Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mayor Crowser, and thank you to all of you for making some time on the floor to tell you about the Bow Valley Waste Management Commission. I've been with the Commission myself as an employee for 12 and some years, and so I think most of the faces in the room are familiar, but for those that don't know me, my name is Andrew Calder. I've been the Commission Manager since 2015, and I've presented similar to previous councils. With the changeover in councils that happened at the last elections, we thought it was probably about time to come back and reintroduce ourselves and really just give you a brief overview of what we do at the Commission and introduce ourselves. So, we are a regional services commission. We were founded back in 1999 by our three founding members, who are the town of Banff, the town of Canmore, and the MD of Bighorn. Our purpose is to provide solid waste management services throughout our service area to municipalities, residents, businesses, and we do that largely based out of the Francis Cook landfill site, which operates just outside of Exshaw. 1998 we were formed, and yeah, to review the three members are MD of Bighorn, town of Canmore, and town of Banff. So we're governed by municipalities, similar to councils. We're governed by the MGA. I'm the head of that administration, and our board of directors are made up of 6 elected officials. Currently we have Councillors Mara, Councillors Marr serving on our board, representing from the town of Canmore. We also have MD of Bighorn representatives Jen Smith and Alice James, and then from Banff we have our current chair Grant Canning and Hugh Pettigrew. We also typically have a liaison through our board meetings with administration from the member councils, so we'll often have Simon Robbins is typically the administrative rep from the town of Canmore, and the idea being there that we can feed back information about what the Commission is up to, and they can feed back what the councils are up to on waste-related issues. Our board are required to act in the interests of the Commission while they're at the Commission table, not necessarily their individual municipalities. For the most part, these align fairly regularly. We don't have a lot of conflict at the table, but yeah, the slightly different hats that we have to wear when we're at the Commission table from council tables. Responsibilities of the board are similar to the overall councils that you'd be used to working in. So they set our strategic direction, they review, approve capital operating budgets, audited financial statements are approved at the end of the year, and they're responsible for reviewing my performance. Our meetings are all public. We hold our board meetings once a month typically, and we do try to send minutes through back to councils, so you should see them as information items, I believe, in your council packages a couple of months after we've held our meetings. Once they're approved, they're forwarded to your administration so that you receive them, hopefully for information. So you may know a little bit about the Commission already. Our general overall mission has been set strategically as to provide and promote responsible waste management solutions. And then we have 3 subdivisions, visionary concepts that we aim to be leaders in waste management in Alberta, that we have a solid self-sustaining financial business, and we foster effective internal and external partnerships. So that's part of why I'm here today, to introduce myself and keep those relations good. Our main operations site is the Francis Cook landfill site. Plays quite a significant part in the local economy. It flies perhaps under the radar a little bit, as waste management tends to, unless it goes wrong. That's the only time we ever make the headlines typically, so I like to stay out of the headlines. We also manage funds for regional waste management infrastructure, part of provincial grants that the Commission manages. That's something that was used, for example, at the town of Canmore to develop the waste transfer station, the East Regional Waste Transfer Station. We also provide waste management and advice to support our municipalities where appropriate through a staffing position, our regional coordinator position, and in total we employ about 12 full-time staff, mostly based out at the landfill and recycling centre. Here's a picture of the entrance gates. As far as landfills go, I always say it's a pretty nice one. Not always quite as nice as this. The weather can be a challenge. We get some pretty extreme weather out there from time to time, but if you haven't been out there, I encourage anyone to come out and visit. Our site is regulated by Alberta Environment and Parks. We handle only Class 3 waste, so that's dry, inert waste, construction and demolition wastes largely, so we don't deal with any of the food waste, any of the bare bin waste that you generate from your households. We handle about 20,000 tonnes of waste through the site annually, around 10,000 of which we landfill, and about 10,000 of which we try and segregate and separate and reuse for recycling. We do have multiple programs for recycling of materials out on site. We are able to recycle yard and garden wastes, scrub and brush wastes, construction lumber, drywall, metal, concrete, asphalt, mattresses and electronic waste. We've managed to segregate all of those materials. And we also have a Class 2, as part of our overall operation, we also have a Class 2 compost facility, which is where we compost all the yard and garden waste which we receive on site, part of which comes from the municipal operations. The bulk of our revenue comes from material tip-in fees that we charge at the gate. Some material, or some revenues we raise from excavating and sale of material. We're constantly excavating the site, the property that we do own, to create airspace for more landfill. We do some sales of landscape rocks. The topsoil that we produce from our yard and garden composting is sold to residents, to commercial projects available on site. And we also crush asphalt paving and concrete and sell those as also recycled materials So I would encourage municipal operations to consider using those materials for any projects that they have within the municipality. That's one way that the municipality can support the Commission, is by providing a demand for recycled products which we generate on the site. We also have a variety of heavy equipment on site. We run excavators, wheeled loaders, shredders, screeners, heavy equipment of this sort. Most of the material that we produce is processed in-house, but we do contract some out, and we also haul some out to further locations for onward processing. This graph is just to give you a rough idea over the years how much we recycle versus landfilling. The red bar being how much we recycle. Usually it's over 50–60%. This year we just figured out our numbers, 64%, which is about average. So about 2/3 of all the waste that we receive, the construction and demolition waste that we receive, is repurposed and turned around into new products. This graph is just to give you a general idea of the waste that's generated in Canmore, the construction and demolition waste anyway. How much of it is generated by the municipality. That's the green section that you see in the pie chart there. So a relatively small amount, slightly smaller amount further still is generated by residents. The vast majority of the waste that we receive on site is from commercial projects, and a large portion of that is excavated material. We take a lot of soil materials which people dig for new basements. As property development continues in Canmore, then there's a lot of soil generated in the valley.
What's the measurement there that's used? So
these are all tons, metric tons. So around 1,500 tons we receive from in municipal operations in total through the year.
Yeah.
About 750 tons comes from individual residents, and 32,000 tons every year, or this year past anyway, comes from commercial projects, construction and demolition, developers, all that kind of thing.
So I thought with the previous slide there was about 20,000 tons per year, but it's actually
yes,
it's actually about 34, 35.
Statistics, yeah. So this includes soil materials, which, as I say, is a large portion of it. We don't typically include soil within the breakdown for diversion. So
Right, because it's not landfill and it's not recycled.
It's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Yes, we use some of
Okay,
it.
thank you.
So just about there, the future for Bow Valley Waste, we're working on a better understanding closure and post-closure costs. We do have to look after the site for 25 years after the site is closed. There's significant engineering expenses involved with closing the site at the end of the day. Better understanding those and the long-term operations plans for the site is something we're constantly working on. We're developing new landfill capacity in the north of our site. We're always reviewing strategies to improve our waste diversion statistics, expanding markets for recycled products. We're members of the Southern Alberta Energy from Waste Association on behalf of our member municipalities, so we pay the membership dues to continue that project and provide the information to member municipalities on that project. And then, yeah, more closure, new site cell development and closure of old cells. That's what's on the future for us. So I hope that gives you a good summary of what we do out at Francis Cook. Nice to meet you all in person, and I'm happy to answer any questions now or at a later date.
Great.
The package contains my contact information, so feel free to reach out to me at any time.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Calder. And yeah, I think there's some questions here. Councillor Faubert.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Calder, for your presentation. You talked a bit about how the Commission owns some recycling type infrastructure regionally. How are you planning to deal with that with EPR coming? Is that something that's been discussed?
That's a good question, and I think we're all waiting to see how the EPR falls out, they're still working on that legislation. I think it's a great step forward that we've had recently with the legislation being put in place, but how that breaks down in terms of logistics for municipalities and how it will affect your operations, we're not quite there as to understanding that yet. In terms of the regional funding that the Commission manages, if there is a role for that funding that will assist or could assist the municipalities, then I think we'd be open to looking at that time. But for now, I don't think we're quite far enough down the line to understanding how those funds might be able to support it. But we're open to the idea.
Awesome. May I ask one more
Yes,
question?
absolutely.
And then what's the time frame for the future space you have for the landfill?
Well, we've had some changes quite recently through our permit through Alberta Environment. We've been permitted to increase the height on the north end of our site, and we're working on reviewing our lifespan expectations for the site. Currently it's around 30 years. I think what we've, with the change in the regulation or the permit, then we're looking at least another 20 years on top of that. So the site should be available for the local economy for another 50 years with any luck, beyond my time at the Commission.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Looking to other members of the committee of the whole. Any other questions? Councillor Graham.
Currently, we truck our compost waste a long ways away. What would it take for your landfill to handle that capacity?
It would require to be factored into our operations plan for a start. We would also need to or apply for a new permit. That would come under a different land use than is currently permitted under our Alberta Environment and Parks industry operating permit. So it would require a change to that. But it's a potential. Something like that could happen. There's nothing to say that it couldn't. It would just require a number of administrative hurdles and operation plans changed to account for that.
Because you don't currently do a composting.
We compost yard and garden waste.
Yeah.
That's a little different
Yeah.
kind of complexity of an organisation. That's maybe not quite backyard composting, but on a similar sort of jump up. When you start dealing with food waste, then there are a lot more regulatory issues surrounding it. There are, that goes with operational issues as well, certainly. It's a challenge. It's not quite as simple as composting yard and garden. What we do is about 500 tons of yard and garden grass and grass clippings, leaves, quite simple composting. When you start getting at the food waste, then it's a little bit, well, quite significantly more complex for sure. That can happen.
One more, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you bet.
What's the number one thing we could do to help you out over the next 3 years?
I think that I would love to see more municipal operations planning to use materials that we can generate at the Francis Cook, so those recycled asphalts, recycled concretes. It seems to me the municipality has operations which require materials on multiple large projects at times, and if we can close the loop, we generate the waste in the first place, send out to Francis Cook where it can be processed. If it can be used again in local projects, then that to me closes the recycling loop and is the ultimate. If I could see all of the waste in the valley following that circle, then that would be ideal, I think. And so probably I would like to encourage municipal operations to consider use of recycled products more than they currently do.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Good question. Any other questions? Seeing none. Oh, you pulled up there, last moment there.
I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Calder. It's a pleasure working with you on this commission. I really like that, so thank you.
Likewise, it's a pleasure working with you all, and yeah, I look forward to working with you going all ahead, and thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thanks for coming here today, and we look forward to when you visit us again.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll now move to item C1, minutes of the January 17th meeting. Looking to the committee to see if there are any errors or omissions that were noted. Seeing none, I will move approval of the minutes of January 17th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now Dr. Cottle is getting ready for D1, Alberta Tourism-Based Community Economic Impact and Fiscal Capacity Reports. Whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm
The
ready
microphone
early
is yours.
because the deputy clerk put my presentation on for me.
Nice.
So nice, I know, thank you, Alyssa. Okay, so I'm here today, Council, to talk to you about the Tourism-Based Communities Economic Impact Report and the Fiscal Capacity Report. So two different reports that we've had commissioned. Canmore is a tourism-based community. This is a relatively new thing for us to fully acknowledge, but it is something that we've been working on through advocacy with the towns of Banff and Jasper for more than 15 years. So we've been working for a long time to try to get provincial recognition of the impact that tourism has on municipalities like ours, and to help get some support from them to provide amenities and the services that we need to host visitor populations. Because we have to provide, we've always known that we have to provide far more capacity because of visitors than we do just for the local population, and these two studies have been part of the effort to actually get data to quantify what we intuitively know. So being a tourism-based community is awesome, but it also creates infrastructure and funding deficits and challenges because there's no recognition of the impact of tourism on municipalities or funding for that in Alberta. So it creates challenges around maintaining community viability and helping the destination remain relevant in a global marketplace, especially in other countries where the state or the equivalent of the provincial or federal government provide local funding for tourism. I'm here today to provide council with two reports. In 2022, the three towns, Banff, Jasper, and Canmore, commissioned these two reports. One is the Economic Impacts of Tourism in the Alberta Rocky Mountains Communities Report, which basically measures the economic impact of tourism locally, provincially, and federally. And the second report is, that's supposed to be Alberta Tourism-Based Community Cost and Fiscal Capacity Report, which outlines the cost implications of hosting visitors and the fiscal capacity of the hosting municipality to effectively address those costs. And the high-level summary of both reports is that it's costly. Additional fiscal capacity is needed to support the communities of Banff, Jasper, and Canmore. Combined, we contribute $112 million into the province in taxes annually and over $2.2 billion in provincial GDP. So these two reports are the work of a consultant named Ben Brunin, and he's done work for the three municipalities historically in the past, providing similar reports and helping us to define for the province what a tourism-based community is. And some proposed recommendations that could help us provide effective amenities to attract visitor populations. Again, that tourism is in support of developing Alberta's economy, not just the local economy. And his previous reports helped us to convey the need for what at the time we were advocating for, which was resort municipality status, which is similar to the status that British Columbia has. So in 2022, myself and the CAOs from Banff and Jasper contacted Ben Brunin again to conduct a new analysis using updated data and to identify the incremental costs that the communities are seeing to provide services to visitor and to provide a comparator with other communities in Alberta. So the first report is the Economic Impacts of Tourism in Alberta report. And the key findings are, and in doing this analysis, Mr. Brunin did three different scenarios. The actual data from 2019, the actual data from 2021, remembering that we were in the middle of a pandemic, and then a business as usual assessment. So he took all of the financial data from previous years and made a growth growth assumption for 2021, if we had not had a pandemic, what would the likely growth have been? That's the business as usual model. And the conclusion is that the 3 towns are highly tourism dependent communities. We contribute a disproportionate amount of tourism, GDP, jobs, and taxes in the province. Collectively, the Rockies contribute, the 3 communities attract $2.3 billion in visitor spend in 2019. That's over $2 billion in total GDP, 23,000 plus jobs, and $308 million in taxes to the economy. Specifically to Canmore, 19 to 24% of the expenditures in the Canadian Rockies by municipalities are made by Canmore. Are expended in Canmore. So 19 to 20% of expenditures by visitors in the Canadian Rockies are spent in Canmore. Visitors spend less on accommodation in Canmore than they do in the other mountain communities, but they spend more on other aspects like food and beverage, transportation, and recreation. And this really benefited our community during the pandemic in particular. In 2019, visitors spent $445 million in Canmore, which contributed $379 million in GDP, over 4,500 jobs, and approximately $58 million in taxes. The pandemic impacts to Canmore meant that there was, of course, a decline in 2021, and this was largely due to reduced international visitor spending. But despite that, there still was an increase in domestic tourism, and we certainly, anybody who remembers the beginning stages of the pandemic will remember how busy Canmore was with day trippers especially. And this change during the pandemic is in stark contrast to the declines in domestic spending levels that both Banff and Jasper saw. You may remember that Banff was very clear in saying visitors are not welcome. There's only 2 entrances and 2 exits to Banff, so they were able to put up barriers. So day trippers were really left coming to Canmore. We certainly felt that with the increase in domestic tourism. Mr. Brunin posits that in the absence of the pandemic, spending in Canmore would have increased to $48 million in 2021 with correlating impacts to GDP, jobs, and taxes.
For $480 million.
480, sorry, yes, thank you. The second report is the Tourism-Based Communities Costs and Fiscal Capacities Report. And this report quantifies the added costs as a result of serving a fluctuating visitor population on the municipality. And as I said at the beginning, this was long understood, but now is documented. And contrasted with Banff, the report contrasted Banff, Jasper, and Canmore with, this should be 33, sorry, Alberta towns with comparable populations of service and infrastructure scale. And those 33 towns are listed in the appendices of the report. And the findings are that there's above average spending in the categories related to supporting visitor economy. So things like public transit, bylaw enforcement, waste management, fire rescue response, housing, wastewater, and other social amenities like libraries, museums and halls, FCS services, parks, recreation. Our 3 communities spend more in those categories than the other 33 municipalities we were compared to because of the impact on tourists and visitation in the community. So the results is that we have the highest per capita expenditures of all the comparator communities and limited fiscal capacity to make up the revenue shortfall because we're really restricted in how we can collect revenue to pay for those increased costs. So the Canmore specific findings, Canmore spends approximately $15 million or 26% of our expenditures to support visitors. And it's important to note, this is not in the Brunin report, but is in the staff report. That several years ago, the Council of the Day made a very purposeful policy decision, also on the recommendation of Ben Brunin, I may add. He was the consultant who did our property tax task force, who recommended a split in the residential and non-residential tax share. And Council took the recommendation from that task force and put it into policy. And in doing that, we've ensured equity and competitiveness in our tax rates with our neighboring and comparator municipalities. But it's also had an impact on some of the numbers in Mr. Brunin's report. So the report that Mr. Brunin prepared, this fiscal capacity report, uses federal census data. It does not include our non-permanent population. So the shadow population is missing in the calculations he's made for population numbers. And Banff and Jasper don't have second homeowners to the same magnitude because of their need to reside clause, although we all know there are a few people who manage to work around those rules, but generally it's a very different scenario than it is in Canmore. So some of the items in Mr. Brunen's report need to be placed in that context of the population numbers and how they were used. So population does matter. If our full paying tax homeowner population were included, Canmore would be average or below average in the several points in the report. So the report says that Canmore has the highest resident taxes per capita of the 33 comparator communities, but when our shadow population is actually factored in, our resident per capita tax rate is closer to average. And you see that every year when we are doing, we just did that for you as part of the budget, right? Did the comparator of where our tax rates fall. And because we use the full population when we make that calculation. And we should, because that full population includes the homeowners, right? We do it based on homeownership. So on a per dwellet or homeownership basis, Canmore is close to average of the municipalities reviewed, again, due to that policy target. And the non-residential tax rate split is in line with average or similar communities. So the per dwelling count allows for the inclusion of non-permanent owners, as the regular population does not. And Canmore is above but close to the average for municipal non-resident taxes per business, as per the tax policy split. So the overall conclusions of both reports are that the three communities, again, are the highest per capita expenditures of any comparative community in the province. Infrastructure, amenities, and services geared towards hosting visitors do have a financial impact on all the communities. We spend approximately 43% in Banff, 32% in Jasper, and 26% in Canmore of our budgets on our visitor populations. Which means we face significant demands to support visitors, and we have limited fiscal capacity to generate the revenue needed to make up that gap. So we are continuing our collaborative efforts with Banff and Jasper on advocating to the province for some type of recognition of the impact of tourism on our communities. The costs for these two reports were equally shared by the three communities, and they're part of our ongoing advocacy efforts with the province for recognition for the impacts of tourism. We've moved away from asking for resort municipality status and are now focused on a tourism designation, which does not currently include a funding mechanism, but it does recognize that there is something unique and special about the three communities, and it gives other communities who would like to have tourism as a main part of their economy something to strive for by being clear about what the designation means and what the criteria are. Both of these reports have previously been presented to the Banff and Jasper Council, so you're the last to see them, and they have been shared with the province and are being shared now with industry, so they're part of the conversation about where we're trying to move things. And that's really it, just a high-level overview, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Cottle. Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you for the presentation. Does this report include our school tax when it comes to the taxes? Because like when I look at the individual lines, it's all municipal funded tax. It's not the school tax organization, which is a large part of our property tax bill. So I'm just curious if that number factors in at all, or if that's just a totally separate number which we can just tack on to the top of this.
It's a totally separate number. Yeah, it was not contemplated as part of these reports. Yeah, but it is certainly when we're looking at local taxes and the impact of taxes on viability of the community, it's a big part, but it wasn't part of these reports. Correct.
That's what I figured. Just wanted to make sure.
No, good question.
Thanks.
Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Dr. Cottle, for your presentation. I have a couple questions, but I'll just start with one that's kind of, there's a table 1 in the second report that on page 8 of the cost and fiscal capacity. What do we define as public housing operations? Is that BVRH or CCH?
That would be CCH.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I will let other people ask questions for my next question.
Or why don't you go with your next question?
Okay, okay. Figure 4 on page 11.
Same report? Yep.
Same report. Residential And figure 6, the tax share compared to assessment share gap. That's like, what does measuring this tell us? I was just struggling with, it would seem like a really complex ratio to understand, and I just need a little bit more context if you're able to.
Yeah, I can try. Okay. I mean, I'm going to be honest, this is not my area of expertise. But as I understand it, so the gap is a measure of the difference between the share of municipal residential taxes, your property taxes, and then the total municipal property assessment. A negative value means that the tax share is less than the residential assessment share. I'm sorry, I'm reading this out loud. Equals the assessments.
Yeah,
Oh, so what he's suggesting, okay, and so I might answer your question in backwards, so interrupt me at any time. But I believe what he's suggesting there, one of the things we often hear when we've advocated to the province in the past for this kind of designation is that we have really low mill rates. That often is one of the first things that we'll hear from the province when we meet with them, but your mill rate is the lowest in the whole province, so just increase your mill rate. And that the mill rate is a measure that the province uses around community viability, and it makes Canmore look really good because our mill rate is low. But what it means is the value of properties in Canmore is really high, so we can have a low mill rate. It's not an indicator. In an example like Canmore, for example, it's not an indicator of the affordability of a home, but the province uses it as an indicator of the affordability of a home. So I believe what Mr. Brunin is saying with this tax share and assessment share gap is sort of following that province's argument that when your mill rate is really low, there's likely room. If you have really high property value, you could probably tax more. Because the assumption is, if your property is worth a lot, people can afford more in taxes. I believe that's part of what this is trying to get at, is to suggest that there's room in residential taxes. The problem, as we all know, is one, that's not true. We have a lot of people in Canmore who have aged into a house that's now worth, that they could never buy into. I'm likely included. I don't know that I could afford my house today. And then to Councillor Hillstead's question earlier, that doesn't factor in the education tax, which is also another affordability component. So, yeah.
Yeah, because in the assessment share, that's like the split between residential, non-residential assessment. So like, if there's more, so we're last time I checked, we're like 80-20.
Mm-hmm. Which is your policy.
And then, that's on our.
We might be 1/3, 2/3.
It's 1/3, 2/3.
Yeah, it's like 66.
67, 67.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
The tax split is the 60, yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Non-residential properties pay.
Higher level. You're correct. Yeah.
So they're going to be a larger part of the share assessment.
yeah, because this measurement is our tax split
Yeah.
divided by our assessment split. And I just it was
Residential
just too
assessment.
complex for my head to understand why
It
this
matters.
measure, what this tells me.
Mr. Brunin is coming in March for our tax workshop, so we can dig into it in detail with him.
And I love taxes, so it's my head was grinding some smoke, so. Yeah.
It's a
Go
great
ahead.
question.
Yeah, awesome. Taxes, how we fund this stuff, okay? That's good for me for now, thank you.
It's all right. All right. Any other questions? Councilor McCallum?
Why not? So, in your presentation, you made a point of noting how we're moving away from looking for resort municipality status, and instead we're looking for some sort of special recognition that we are special communities with special needs, special. What's that going to get us?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's a fair question.
Because
at the end of the
municipality
day,
status, we've sort of told the masses that if we carbon copied what we do and what they do in British Columbia, we might have an opportunity to get funds and specific to tourist amenities.
Yep, and Mayor Krauser, you jump in at any time, because
Yeah.
he's been, had more conversations with ministers
course.
recently than I have. But part of the thinking is, you know, we want to work with the province in terms of where they're interested and politically able to go. And the idea of a designation would mean that there's not necessarily a new pot of funding that's required, but something like LGFF, which will be the replacement for our MSI funding. One of the things we've argued is you could actually include a component, one of the criteria for LGFF funding could be, has a tourism community designation, so that they're not creating a new pot of funding, but using the designation as a criteria in pots of funding that already exist. There may be other ways that it could be applied to policing funding, for example, or grants for fire services and training. So that the idea is that the designation could be a lever in funding places that already exist for some change in criteria that would allow for a top-up without having to create an entire new funding mechanism. Yeah. Anything else you'd add, Mayor Krauser?
Yeah, the advice that we've received, and it has panned out, is that there's two parts of our ask. One is with regards to being recognized as having unique circumstances that are not recognized in the same way as our competitors. Mm-hmm. And as Dr. Cottle has pointed out, that designation in itself can lend itself out of current existing pots of funds, some benefit to those communities. Because there is no doubt in study after study after study, there's a vast difference between our three tourism-based communities and other communities that have tourism. It's a level, and they can certainly aspire to that, but once they spend at least 25% of their budget, which they're not, you know, supporting tourism, or whatever metric you use, there's a clear differential, and it's currently being borne by our own taxpayers, which is not sustainable in the long run, right? So A, designation. B, if not accessing current funding, then we could have a discussion around funding. BC is used as an example of a jurisdiction that does recognize this, but we are not going for a BC model.
Mm-hmm. May I ask why, or is that a side conversation?
Because it's been determined that that's not something that's going to be palatable in the provincial climate that we are in.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So, but that's a separate conversation. Mm-hmm. We need to have the first conversation first, and then see where we're at. And I've just been really appreciative of the conversations that we've had with multiple provincial ministers recently. They totally get that our situations are different than most in Alberta. So.
I had a friend visiting for the last 5 days that's from Ontario, hasn't been west before, and she continued to state, and I, of course, stated this before, like, we don't look like this by accident. You know, our community isn't clean and tidy and everything like that by accident. Our architecture isn't like this by accident. This is all by choice. But she just continued to I love the way your town's set up. She was just, you know, coming from suburban Southern Ontario her entire life, a woman in her 60s, had really never seen a community planned as thoughtfully as ours, and I thought I would share that. Thank you very much for everybody's responses.
I would just add to just an observation that I have is with 25% of our budget supporting tourism-based infrastructure, and yet we are still, because of our self-imposed policies, to be in the average. That means that we are running incredibly lean administratively. because we're on average with those who don't have the same level of tourism-based infrastructure.
And we've been running incredibly lean for as long as we've had this policy in play, which was
Over 10 years
2013, I
now.
believe, right?
Yep.
I thought that one thing I found interesting was this listening to the taxes and the split that they're looking at in the city of Calgary between residential and non-residential, and how they're looking at residential, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, taking up only 52%. Sorry, non-residential taking 52%. I could be wrong. Anyways, I just thought that the split was so far off of ours, it was quite interesting in either way. Now I'm going to have to go do some digging and send you all an email later with the correct numbers, sorry.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, I think Calgary's looking at like a 1% change in either direction, yeah. And some of my questions were answered in the last discussion, but I'm wondering, what was the response, what has the response from the province been, and what are our next steps?
Yeah, so the province, there's been many good conversations with lots of different ministers at the province. I believe Mayor Krausert has another meeting tomorrow with additional provincial ministries. So we're continuing to try to advance it. And there is, I would say this is the most traction I've ever seen in my years at the town from the province at really looking at something. So we're trying to continue to be in touch with them and answer any and all questions that they have. And then I think, your next step as a council is to continue to support the mayor in advocacy. We have a weekly call, where there's a lot going on right now around the advocacy that takes just a good bit of time. So it may be that we need to call on the rest of council at the next Alberta Municipalities Conference or something to meet with folks. But I don't think we quite know that yet. Yeah, but great question.
Good work, and continue on.
Councillor Faubert.
Thank you again. The calculation of the difference between per capita and per dwelling is kind of something that is just specific to Canmore, because we have this non-permanent population. So that kind of changes some of the numbers. But did we ever consider in the report that non-permanent homeowners are visitors as well? And providing services to the, they pay for some services too, but there are services that, it's a different type, it changes how we deliver services because they don't occupy their spaces full year, they don't live here permanently, which I think technically we could define them as a visitor.
Yeah, except that they contribute directly to municipal taxes. So I think because it's a bit of an outlier in Canmore, this is really, this report is also meant to be replicated, right, in various communities. So any of the specific nuances to any one particular community weren't considered, but it is, again, it's a conversation we can have in the tax workshop, which is coming up, and then the property tax task force is in the budget for 2024, so that's another place to explore. I mean, I think what you're on there is an interesting nuance. How do we properly account for and count them, because they do contribute to the tax base we it's not an even or tidy. And we have a hard time counting them. We're not always entirely sure how many there are.
And I don't think there's been a full measurement of what is the economic program, service, and infrastructure impact of having this shadow population. And it just kind of fascinates me. Not a question, thank you.
Ms. Smithers.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add, following up on Dr. Cottle's comment, it is a pretty nuanced conversation around second homeowners, and we actually bumped up against the same issue in another project that we're working on, looking at, for example, water infrastructure, right? From a water usage point of view, sure, the houses that are occupied by second homeowners are going to draw less water. However, from an infrastructure point of view, the town still needs to build all the infrastructure to support that unit. So I think, getting into the town's legislative space to operate in, our concern would be there's a residence there, it needs adequate water, sewer, and the rest of it. It doesn't really matter if people are going to live there part-time or all the time or none of the time. So it's a good point, and it is pretty nuanced.
Because that owner also could be a full-time resident at some point, or sold to a full-time resident, and so it does
Yeah,
change.
and I think there's 2 points there too. There's the infrastructure point, which we have to build the infrastructure. I completely agree with Ms. Smithers. And then there's also the social element, right? And so what happens when neighborhoods are mostly hollow or impacts on other community services, like, yeah, it's tricky. It's a tricky, and it's not particularly common. I mean, there are other communities in Alberta that have something similar, but certainly not in Banff or Jasper for this report. So, fodder for future conversation, I think.
Don't see any other questions, so thank you very much. We'll now move to Councillor Updates. And any questions with regards to my report? Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I came ready with questions this time.
Thank you.
So
Love it.
the Human Wildlife Conflict Roundtable,
Yes.
if I read this correctly, the MD of Bighorn was not a member, and now they are a member.
Correct.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, they had been originally invited and declined, and through our intermunicipal discussions, as well as I get together periodically with Reeve Roswald, I gathered there was a change of perspective in that regard, and so I encouraged the Human Wildlife, and I call it conflict there, we're changing the Human Wildlife Coexistence Roundtable is better.
Yeah.
Encouraged that an invite be put out to them again, which they very quickly accepted.
Follow up, if I may. Any indication that they are prepared to accept the BCA guidelines, which they previously?
That has
had
not been
rejected?
part of the
Okay.
conversation, so I don't know.
I know who to ask. I know, it's not you. I had another question. Just following up to our last COW meeting, and you spoke about the childcare roundtable.
Yes.
What's the process for that?
So I believe it's set for March 3rd. I've put out the invite to those who have contacted me to express interest in the past about being part of a solution. Representatives from various stakeholders, schools, daycares, looking for representation from day homes. We also have a provincial representative that's going to be there. And really, it's about having a conversation starting from the child care assessment report. I'm trying to determine where there might be some synergies for that group that they're interested in moving forward that could either increase spaces or increase staffing, or make it more conducive to attracting and retaining staffing, et cetera, et cetera. You know, is there some low-lying fruit, and if so, where is it? And are they? This isn't. The town isn't typically involved in childcare. We don't have a budget around it, so it's not about taking on a town thing, but it's trying to encourage a community conversation that then can get legs of its own.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
it's on March 3rd, and I'll let everybody know how it goes. And there will be representation from community social development there as well, from the town. Okay. Councillor Ma?
Thank you, Worship. Could you tell me more a little bit about your meeting with Deanna Matthews with Action Canada and her brief with affordable rental housing? Like who the audience was for that? Is that an advocacy piece?
So that was a coffee that Dr. Cottle and I had, and she's basically doing some research and was just really picking our brains on, you know, what is affordability, what could it look like, or, you know, what does it look like here, or lack of affordability. And it's, you know, it's a very different scenario here than in many places due to the high cost of housing here. And we talked about how when programs are developed, often at the provincial or federal level, that they are not targeting our economic brackets that are struggling for housing here. And so it was interesting. I don't know, she was going to be doing a report, and I don't know, haven't seen anything since.
Great, thank you, sir.
Dr. McCallum. Councillor McCallum.
Yeah, that'll never be me. I am curious about your Mid-Sires Mayor's Caucus, especially the item about potentially hiring an executive director, and wondering how that moves within the existing Alberta municipalities sort of space, and is it better to not work within Alberta municipalities to do this, or is that what we're doing? I feel like we're potentially creating an organization that will run adjacent to Alberta municipalities, and I'm not sure I'm 100% comfortable with that.
Yeah, we're actually not at all in opposition or misalignment with Alberta municipalities, but we're a subsector of what Alberta municipalities is that is actually not fully represented by Alberta municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some things that are just like Edmonton and Calgary would have some things that they advocate for outside of Alberta municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
Alberta mid-sized cities are the same.
Mm.
And so we're actually looking to have similar conversations that it's not about starting another organization for the sake of starting an organization. There has been some talk about hiring human resources to assist keep things moving forward in between meetings, because it's done off the side of several mayors' desks right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so but nothing has been conclusively decided yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so, for example, to make sure that we were not in competition with Alberta municipalities, Canmore has been tapped on the shoulder, and we've agreed to host a summit of sorts, which is not only the mayors and CAOs, but all councils would be able to be invited to learn more about what we're talking about, as well as MLAs throughout the province. And originally it was thought to happen this fall, but we didn't want people to have to choose or feel they had to choose between this one or Alberta municipalities. And so we're moving the summit to January. And so we'll get advanced information to all of the municipalities so they can actually have it as part of their budgeting process. And hopefully they will be encouraging their councillors to go to not one or the other, but to both. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I love questions. I love questions. Seeing no more there, moving to Councillor Faubert's report. And I did have a question there. Around the museum's work, I was interested by the Uncovering Canmore's Heritage Project. And so something's going to come to council. What can we be expecting as far as what this project's all about?
So I think that there's a lot of detailed nuances to this, but it kind of starts with an inventory. What things exist here that have heritage values or historic value on any sense of the scale? And there have been 2 inventories done before. The last one it was like 1982 and 2002. And then, so that information has been taken by a consultant, and an update of everything in the community that has some heritage value is being created. Then out of that comes the work of bringing forward a plan or a strategy for recognizing that, potentially preserving it, or encouraging landowners to preserve their heritage. And some of those things are not the museum's role. So like we have a municipal heritage resource designation, and there's like, we can use incentives, and like the hotel is our only one, and there were things that they were provided in that have never been used. Like stacking cars for parking in the loading zone. So just kind of trying to bring forward something that we as a community and as council could have a role to play in that would preserve, acknowledge the heritage of things in our community. It's hard, like, there's a lot of, I think, desire for this, and a lot of people in the community who really feel sad every time they see one of those miners' houses come down and like a duplex go up, right? But on the other end of that, you can't really preserve things unless you own them yourself, right? And then the other part is the province has kind of delisted some heritage values, kind of like the mine manager's house and the cabin. And so the only things that we have really are the United Church and the barracks that are provincially designated. So how do all these different heritage designations work? And then how can we, you know, create a plan that, but in order to preserve things, we have to know what's there. So that's the best way that I can explain.
Will there be any, you mentioned 1982 and 2002, so about every 20 years, will there be any comparison with those previous ones to see what has been lost?
Yeah, it's gone down significantly. I think 320 places were in 82, then it was down to like 180 in 2002, and now it's even down even further.
Wow.
But sometimes, like, you don't even need things to be there anymore to recognize some of the heritage. So, like, even the lamp house, right? Like, we have this structure that is from the original mines that is just deteriorating and being vandalized. I don't know who's doing it, but I can guess. But it's gated, it's tarped, it's trying to be protected, but it's also in a wildlife corridor. So do we restore that building to its original structure and use it as a heritage resource, or do we stabilize it as in its current state and have it as a different level of heritage? So instead of being a place where people go to do some, like a museum, like the barracks, it kind of is like it's like the ghost church proposal for the McDougall Church after it burned down. Like, we can still preserve things without having to restore them or to keep them forever. And there's lots of places where, you know, we could have some heritage, and like even the walking tour does that. I think it would be amazing if we could have at least one mine house preserved somehow in some way in this community. Like, this is the style of housing that existed, but you need that landowner to agree to it. And then that's where, like, our heritage designation, the municipal heritage resource designation, comes with some sort of bonus, some incentive. But that's not a discussion for anyone else to have for us.
Right.
Therefore, eventually, like, this work comes to us so that we get an understanding of what's out there, and then there's the potential for our conversation of how do we continue to value that and preserve it. I think Banff's done a really good job. They have really detailed heritage inventories. They have like Class A, Class B, Class C, you know, because, you know, there's some value to everything. It just doesn't necessarily mean it's preserved forever, but it's good to know.
But it could be marked by a plaque, or it could be recognized in some other way.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. I look forward to hearing more when it comes to council. Thank you. Any other questions of Councillor Faubert? Any questions of Councillor Graham? Anything at all? How are you feeling?
Not awesome.
No. Yeah, still recovering. Councillor Ma.
For Councillor Graham, tell me a bit more about the consistent public art signage piece. What's the scope of that, or I'm trying to understand.
Oh, sure.
So the town owns a significant public art portfolio, and over the years, there hasn't been consistent signage, plaques, memorial, whatever, across our art collection, and the committee is looking to remedy that.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Hillstead? Any questions for Councillor Maw? For Councillor Mera? Councillor Hillstead?
I see that residents are starting to move in to the new wing. So when do we expect full occupancy? Like, how long of a period? Is it over a couple months? Is it like?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. We're currently filling the top floor, which is assisted living, and then our lower floor is for people that have like dementia or Alzheimer's. So the full occupancy is expected to be in June. We're just gradually putting people in so that everything can be worked out. So.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Councillor Faubert?
This is just a weird question. What is spin damage for a book?
Oh, I should say spine. I did notice that after.
I was just like, are people putting it in the washing machine?
No,
and the
no.
spin cycle? Like, what is happening with these books?
Yeah, I noticed that. I
figured it's a typo.
Yeah, it's a typo.
I was looking at it, I was like,
I just noticed that as I'm looking and going, Tanya's going to ask that. So
Yes,
yes.
it's like,
So
what?
spine
Okay.
damage is,
Spine-
spine damage is correct.
Thank you.
Right on.
I had several typos in my report as well, so thank you for not asking about.
It's a good one.
Yep.
Okay. Any questions for Councillor McCallum? Councillor Graham?
I just want to say that it's fantastic to see Rome numbers up from 2019. Whatever you guys are doing there, keep up the good work.
Councillor McCallum?
It was great to see the announcement about our 1.6 million of ridership for 2022. And as I think I've said before, we're one of the few transit facilities that are actually matching, if not increasing, over 2019 numbers, which is a credit to our fantastic board and our even more fantastic executive director.
Yeah, many cities are 60% or running at 60% of their pre-COVID numbers, yeah. Okay.
And then cutting service, which then just feeds the problem, right? So
Right. Okay.
you cut service, then people don't want to ride, so it just feeds the problem.
I thought you said petting service, and I was like, I don't know what that is.
No, that's the dogs on buses question. Okay. Any other questions for Councillor McCallum? All right, we will move then to our administrative update, F1. Oh, Councillor Hillstead, do you have? Okay. Okay, so starting with the CAO's office, Councillor Hillstead.
I'm just curious if we've received any response yet for the formal letter that we sent to the province requesting the provincially owned parcels in the Palliser area.
We have a meeting next week.
Wonderful.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Section A, CAO's office? Councillor Faubert?
I have a question, but I was hoping for an update on the joint use planning process with the school boards. JUPA. It's not in here, but I didn't know if it was in next month's report, I can wait.
Ms. Smithers?
No, that will be headed up from, with the town solicitor, and I don't believe it has bubbled up on his list of priorities right now, understandably. And we did confirm with the province that because we do have joint use planning agreements in place with the school boards in town, and we don't see any land subdivision that would be big enough to include a school site coming up in at least the next year, it was a lower priority. They were okay with extending the time frame for us to complete that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Looking to section B, municipal services. Councillor Ma?
Yeah, this is just a question. I've been hearing a lot about paid parking on my end. What's the status report on the non-resident employee parking pass?
Thanks for the question. I know that pass is being anticipated by the business community. The workflow has been reviewed with the vendor. Some feedback has been given. We're just waiting on a timeline for them to respond to that. So I don't have an exact timeline, but it's a work in progress.
Okay, can I ask a little?
Yeah.
And so, like, I kind of get a feeling that with parking, is it the sort of thing where it's like a parking 2.0, where all these various changes will come together at once, perhaps, or do they kind of come in like piecemeal? Like, here's this pass, and then maybe this is another thing that we'll do. I was just curious when I hear from residents, like how that rolls through.
Yeah, let me know if this answers your question, because it's a good one. Is after we have a year of data under our belt, we'd like to review that and see if any changes are recommended for the program, or if status quo is meeting the needs of the integrated transportation and parking management plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Frobert?
Thank you. Under economic development, the business registry statistics, busking is relatively new, 3 permits in 2021, but 12 in 2022. Overall, how did having permitted busking go?
I guess it's in a qualitative capacity. Is that I'm hesitant to answer the question because it might be my opinion. I think with any new program, there's learnings. I guess the longer it runs. So we had a few hiccups, a few bumps, which have been ironed out. There's been more communication about the need for a permit.
It looks like more people are getting a permit. And so do we have complaints about busking, or was the busking all permitted last year?
With relative confidence, I would say that probably there was unpermitted busking that occurred. But I would say complaints weren't numerous. We didn't have hundreds of complaints. There's likely a couple of complaints, as there is with a lot of activities.
I did speak to some people who were buskers who were really excited to get permits and to have the ability to busk. So I'm coming at this as from a positive, like, is it working for the people we're permitting? Are they being able to share their music?
I think so. It's great you've heard that. I think during the program launch, there were people who are unaware, and that was surprising for them. But based on the numbers, it seems that more are choosing to go through the process.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Mero?
Thank you. Thank you. Just continuing on the economic development side, I'm just curious for verification. Can you tell me, when we do the market, where would their permits fall under? Like under vendors, special events, where does it fall?
When you say the market, the
outdoor market. Let me apologize, sorry.
I'd have to double check exactly where that one falls, unless.
Oh.
I just need to go to Reddit. It doesn't show up. So we have a contract with the person who runs the market, and they do all of the permitting themselves. So the vendor permits, anything associated with the market is handled completely by the contractor. Our only interaction with the market is with the primary liaison. We're not involved in the permitting of vendors at all.
Okay. I was
Yeah.
just was curious whether numbers were up or down, that's all. So,
Yeah, we could
Where
get
they
that
fell.
through the market coordinator, but it's not anything that we would
No.
track.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Anything else with regards to municipal services? All right, moving on to corporate services. I have a question there around the IT and that cybersecurity awareness program. Just wondering, is that something that will also, council will take as well?
Absolutely. You will be part of phase 2
Excellent.
in the second quarter, which is for all existing users.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for corporate services? Seeing none, moving to municipal infrastructure. Councillor Faubert.
Sorry, had a quick draw over here. Thank you. I had a question regarding mountain pine beetle program. How do the numbers for Canmore compare to the past several years? Are we seeing more pine beetle trees or the same or less?
I'm not sure.
No? Okay.
I can look into that, though.
Great, thank you. Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I had a question regarding facilities and the $65,000 cost increase to the Stan Rogers. Being funded by the rooftop solar expansion. I guess my question is more around procedure around things that are over budget or under budget, and how and when we decide money should be transferred from other reserves.
Okay, so we do have a budget transfer policy approved by council that allows administration to move monies around from one project to another, as long as that transfer doesn't affect the scope or increase the overall budget, increase the scope of either project or increase the overall budget that council has approved. So it does give us some flexibility, particularly in cases like this with the Stan Rogers stage. It was one of those projects where every time we started to focus on one part of rehabilitating the stage, we realized more was wrong with it. So it gave us the flexibility to get in there and address the problems and make sure the stage was built back and safe and available for community partners to use over the summer without having to come back to council to look for a budget increase when we knew that at the same time we had a project on our plates that was coming in under budget.
Yeah, so you should probably have a read of that. Can you remind me of the bylaw, that, what's that called? Because there you go. Because it actually sets out all of the different scenarios, and it gives the CAO the opportunity to make those changes in certain circumstances without coming back to council.
Yep.
Dr.
If I could
Cotto?
just add to that, then we are trying, in addition to that policy direction, we are trying to be transparent, so reporting on it in this way. And then when the financials, we have quarterly financial meetings with council where you get an update on our, how we're doing on meeting the, or around the budget. And so when in April is the next finance committee, I believe, we'll do closeouts, the capital closeouts, and this would also be reported as part of that. It's reported back to council in those formal reports. So even though we can do those transfers internally, we do try to be transparent and clear in all of our documentation about it.
And it disappoints me that the rooftop solar expansion's that underutilized, I guess. I wish that money wasn't there for that.
Well, it wasn't underutilized. The project was completed as scoped. It was completed under budget.
It's for the rec center.
Thank you.
If it was a reduction in scope, we are not able to do that under the approved council policy. At that point, we would need to come back to council for a change in either scope or budget.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Any other questions for Section D, municipal infrastructure?
One more from you
Yep.
over here.
Councillor Graham, go ahead.
Can you help utilities and 10th Street? Just anecdotally, it seems that pipe is frozen several times in the last little while. Is there, what's going on there?
I don't know that I would say that pipe has broken quite a few times. I mean, it is older infrastructure. I believe that area, we're going to be looking at some upgrades, but they still are quite a few years out for infrastructure replacement. I think some of it is just the freeze-thaw cycle that we have, and pipes will break. I recall other ones being on like Railway and other places through town. I don't think that this one was anything extraordinary in that sense.
Larch has often had some, because the
Yeah.
pipes are pretty close to the surface, yeah.
Yeah.
This one's been 2 or 3 times in the last, like, recent couple years, maybe?
There was one further down on the same line that closer to the intersection. But yeah, I mean, if it was anything that was out of the ordinary,
We would be coming forward with a project to take a look at a bigger replacement. So it's, I think it is just life cycle, and there's a tolerance level we have for expecting that we're going to have to go in and do some repairs.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions for municipal infrastructure? Seeing none. Council resolution action lists, any questions arising there? Seeing none. And then, of course, there's some correspondence there for information. And with that, it was estimated we'd be done at 2:20, and here we are at 2:22, and I'm moving that we adjourn. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now, we are back here for a